So now I've got the pleasure of introducing Katy Perkins. Katy's a licensed clinical social worker and supervisor, and she's the CEO and clinical director of Find Self Counseling. Katy specializes in post-adoption, sexual and domestic violence recovery, childhood trauma, and oppression and discrimination. Katy's an adopted person herself, and she's been reunited and also worked in the post-adoption world as a volunteer and a professional for more than 20 years. I especially thank Katy for joining us this evening. She just finished up, or is in the process of finishing up, a cross-country move. So I was especially impressed that she agreed to do this in the midst of all that. And I'll be putting Katy's counseling website in the chat as we get going as well. So hand it off to you, Katy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Betsy. It's really good to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I actually met Betsy when I was, speaking of volunteering and things for more than 20 years. I probably was 19 or something when I met you and asked about, how do we be more adoption informed in our social work practice, and how do I bring this to that world? And so, yeah, I grew up a little bit in your orbit, so to speak. So it's really exciting to be here. And I see Michelle and Barbara and all my people here, so that's cool. Welcome, everybody. I'm Katy, and I'm excited to be talking to you about this topic tonight. I just want to say there's a couple of caveats to what I'm going to talk about. This could be triggering for some folks. If you have really complicated or really toxic family systems, depending on what you've experienced growing up, for some people, this is huge. It's traumatic to be around their family. And for some people, it's a mild annoyance. So just bear in mind that, if you need to take care of yourself, take a break, look away, check your phone, it's fine. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself while I'm talking about this. Also, yes, Betsy's going to share, we've got Find Self Counseling in the comment box. I am licensed in multiple states, but I provide a consult to people all over the country. So if therapy is not the right fit, if you need to talk, we can do a short consult together. So I just have a casual list of bullet points to talk about tonight, and it's just going to be for about 30 minutes or so, and then there's plenty of time for you to ask your questions. And please feel free to enter your questions at any time. If I see it pop up, I may answer it right away, or we'll have Betsy bring up more questions at the end. So when I think about families during the holidays, every family is so different. You could be talking about your biological family, adoptive family, people you've grown to know through foster care or chosen family. It could be any number of types of family systems, but spend enough time around anybody and they're going to drive you a little crazy. So even if you have the most blissful family experience and you all get along great, if you spend enough time together, you're going to start to find things that really bug you about each other. So difficulties from the holidays can vary from, I get really annoyed when Aunt Sally has a couple too many drinks at dinner and talks about religion, because then everyone gets up in arms at the dinner table, to Dad gets really drunk and it's frightening, and I don't want to be around that. I don't know how to cope when he gets that way. So bear in mind that not every suggestion is going to fit every situation. I'm thinking to my clients and what they struggle with. For myself, the people that I usually work with are struggling with pretty significant disruption in their family system. There's usually maybe elements of narcissism that some family members are struggling with, or untreated mental health issues. There may be a history of abuse or trauma or substance use in the family. And so sometimes these smaller problems that folks are dealing with really are the tip of the iceberg for other things that have been going on in the family for a very long time. So I think what I want to say first and foremost is do what you need to stay safe. You're not required. There's no rules. You're not required to be around people that bring out the worst in you every year. However, I know every family has their own kind of unspoken rules. So if you think about, maybe I don't want to go home this year, or I don't want to go see my family this year, and then your automatic response is, oh my God, that would never fly. That would never be acceptable, or would crush my sister, or everybody knows you go to so-and-so's house during the holiday season. I would ask you to question that a little bit. Who says? What would happen? What do you risk? What's the worst that could happen? Like, let's follow that for a minute. If the worst that can happen is someone gets angry and disinvites you, is that okay with you? So some people would say that's okay with them because they were looking for an excuse not to go back. So it can help to think through those concerns in advance. So I'm just focusing on safety for the moment because if what you need to function in the world and to keep your sanity and your mental health and safety intact is to not be around certain people, you're allowed to do that. People are allowed to change and grow, and you're allowed to change your mind. Just because you've done something for the last 20 years does not mean you're required to do that for the next 20 years. And if you're dealing with a family where there's maybe someone really comes down hard on someone kind of pushing the rules, so to speak, we may be dealing with a little bit of enmeshment. If you have to follow one person's rules in your family and no one else, and there's no flexibility in that, maybe you can create some of your own flexibility. And that's where the setting the boundaries comes in. So one example then would be to consider some other possibilities. So what if you went, we're going to use a particular example. We'll say we're talking about kind of a stereotypical nuclear family. Perhaps one person in the family is adopted, just for a go-to reference point, okay? And you go home to that family every year. Maybe this is the year to stay at a hotel. There's some small things you can do like that to build enough space in for yourself so you can take a break, you can get a little distance, you can go back to your safe haven in the evening after you have dinner, if that's what you all do together, or you could shorten your trip. You could stay in a hotel and shorten your trip. You could do both. Now, I have a lot of clients that when we get to the maybe stay in a hotel part, they will say, well, that won't go over, it's going to hurt someone's feelings. And, consider that these boundaries can save relationships sometimes, not make it worse. If you find that spending 2 18-hour days together makes you want to flip your lid when you're around certain people, you might actually enjoy your time with them better when you're staying at a hotel and you're only there for 6 hours, for example, or you do an activity and then have lunch together and then go your separate ways. Sometimes spending less time together is more, because you can focus more on the positives of your relationship and less on the conflict that might arise the longer you're around each other. Like I said, the more time you spend with someone, sooner or later, you're just going to start bugging each other. It's inevitable. When you're spending time with your family or your friends or whoever, I always recommend games. I find that games can be a great way to get through difficult situations. It's a distraction. It's team building. It gives you conversation that isn't, race, politics, or religion. Side note, it's not necessarily always bad to talk about those things, but we'll get to that. But if you are with people that sort of, maybe they can't handle that responsibility of speaking responsibly about topics and hearing other people's opinions, let's play a game. You could do a game swap. You could bring games with you, cards, board games. I would say something that's a little easier. If none of you have ever played poker before, I can see how it might get tense trying to figure out the rules with people that you don't communicate with so great. And while I'm thinking about it, I also want to point out that when you're around family who you've known for most of your life, we tend to regress. So we tend to revert to our original rules. And that's part of why, if you're with family that doesn't get along so great, you start going at each other a lot. Oh, that's a typical Jeremy. He always acts like that at this time of year. And it brings up all that old stuff and the ways that you've always interacted with each other in the past, you can repeat it. And so that's why sometimes you might notice patterns in the conflict in the family where, you know, it's only when we're all together that the siblings argue, and this other sibling argues with dad because they've never gotten along, and everything just amps up further and further. And so anything you can do to just turn down the volume a little bit can be helpful. And that's one of the reasons I suggest games. So it's a way to play together. If you can play together, you're more likely to be able to share or be vulnerable together. And I know that's ideal. That's not always going to be what happens. Games aren't going to fix everything, but it can buy you a couple of hours of get along time. Sometimes it might be a good way to spend some time together. I also want to talk a little bit about guilt. So if you are considering not being around family and the number one biggest feeling that comes up is guilt, I would encourage you to examine that a little bit. What exactly is it that you're feeling guilty about? Never underestimate how strongly people feel about different holidays and family time. We tend to want to recreate our childhoods if we have some good memories of those times together. And if not everybody's in on it, it can kind of feel like a betrayal. Like, this was the family agreement we made. We come together. This is what we do every year. And it can feel like a loyalty violation, which is extra sensitive for adopted people. I'm now remembering, so in my adopted family, there's a coffee cake that we make every year. It's the Teese family coffee cake. It's my mom's maiden name. And we've done the math. I think we have figured out it's been made every year for at least 60 years, maybe longer. And one of my family members, one year I had the gall to suggest that maybe we could do something different this year. We could have like an egg bake or a more savory dish because to switch it up a little bit from the coffee cake. And one of my sweet family members, we laugh about it now, but they said, you know, your grandmother would roll in her grave if you didn't make the coffee cake this year. And they were really serious. Okay, now I know the rule. The rule is the gauntlet's been thrown. We have to have the coffee cake every year. So my compromise to that is I'll make something in addition, or someone else can make something in addition to the coffee cake. That's a super low level conflict. That's like the lowest level conflict that I can think of. But it's a milder example that there may be compromise to be had, instead of, you know, he never lets me make something different when I want to. So if you're trying to roll with it, there may be some compromises to be had, but that's assuming good faith. That's assuming you're engaging in negotiation in good faith together. And I realize that's not always the case in all families. I mentioned loyalty violation, especially for adopted people who may be reunited newly, or maybe not so newly. I'm working with someone currently who we've been talking about, how do I tell my adopted family I'd like to take a Christmas to go see my birth family instead? And how not well that would go over with family. That's a big issue. And then how do you answer questions if family members ask about, how did your meeting go? Or did you talk to them this year? Did you call them for Christmas? Or they may ask some really snarky questions depending on your family dynamics. You know, how dare you take time away from our family to call them today? You know, this is supposed to be family time. So it can really get heavy for people. So I find, at least for my clients, they seem to have more success with their interactions the better they get at identifying how they're feeling, and the better they get at being able to articulate that to others. So taking into account that we get blindsided all the time with these questions that we don't always know how to answer, or we weren't prepared, it can be helpful to just go basic, to say things like, you know, I really appreciate you asking about that. I'm not quite ready to talk about that yet though, but I'm really, it's sweet of you to ask. And when I'm ready, or if and when I'm ready, I'll let you know. You know, if they're asking pushy questions or questions you don't have answers to, you're not always required to have all the answers. So let's go with other non-adoption related questions. What's going on with your job? Maybe you've been thinking about leaving your job and you're not sure, but you really don't want to talk about it. You know, I'm not sure. I appreciate you asking. I'm really not in the mood to talk about it right now. Can we fill in the blank? Can we do something else? Can we watch something together? What I think about is there's always so many more things, or there should be so many more things you can do together and talk about together. It doesn't always have to be the top 5 most sensitive things that someone could ask you to talk about during a sensitive time of the year. Now, the holding the boundary is sometimes the more difficult part. So if they say, going back to that example, did she talk to you? What did you think about her? What did your husband think about, you know, you reaching out to her? Again, I really don't want to talk about it right now. It's thoughtful of you to ask, even if maybe it's not, but you know, if you're just trying to get out of that moment, let's try to de-escalate, not re-amplify it. But you know, I appreciate you asking. I know you're just curious, but I'm really not ready to talk about that yet. So let's do something else. And they push it. Well, I don't understand what the big deal is. Why can't you just talk about it? First of all, that's rude. That's just poor manners, right? So the holding of the boundary is the important thing. So instead of then, to your own detriment and possibly regret, starting to talk about it when you're not ready, you don't have the words, you don't really want to talk about it, to stick with it and say, you know, I've said I don't want to talk about it. I know you're just dying to know. It's not that it's a big deal, but I really don't want to talk about that right now. So enforcing the boundary is repeating it if necessary, and you might have to walk away. So you have a right to express your feelings and to make your feelings and desires and requests known. You can't force people to respect them. So you don't really get to, or at least it's not a best practice to say, I told you my boundary and you're disrespecting it. Well, clearly they can do that if they want to. It's up to you to stand by it and to say, you know, I've said that I don't want to talk about this. I'm going to go ahead and go do something else, or I'm going to walk away, or I love you, but this really isn't the time. I'm going to step away from this conversation. You have the power to remove yourself from certain kinds of situations. Caveat being, I know everyone's situation is different, and you may not feel like you have the power, and you may not have enough practice to really execute it yet, but you got to start somewhere. And typically, the more you start setting down boundaries with people that tend to walk right over them, usually they tend to pick up on it after a while and kind of go along. Once they see you're not gonna take the bait, they usually start to back off a little bit. If they don't, then it's up to you how you want to respond. So for most of my clients, when they have family members that are constantly overstepping, they were usually already wanting to distance themselves from those family members. And then after they go through the whole process of setting and holding the healthy boundary, and they see that their family member just can't handle it, they start to distance themselves a little more. So that may be a possibility, but that's the part you do have control over, is how you want to respond. We can't control how our family and friends are going to respond to our comments, but we can control how we respond to them. You are not required to subject yourself to this every year. You can do something else if you want to. You can bring something else to eat. You can say, I love you, but I'm going to take a little break this year and I'm going to go do something else. And that may end up being a test. You may discover through taking that step how well that can be tolerated within your family system. And that can give you more information to decide how you want to move forward from there. You might start your own new traditions. You might travel, like I said, you might introduce ideas like, these sound so small, but for many families, it's a big deal. Like, instead of buying everyone a present, let's draw names, or let's do an ornament exchange or a cookie exchange, or we're all going to donate to charity and then present that donation to the person you gifted in their name. So you might try some other things just to see what sticks. You might do something every year, who knows? I want to also make sure that I add that protecting children is very important. So if you have family members, unfortunately, that are making, really racist comments, or religiously oppressive comments, or anti-Semitic comments, things of that nature, it can be tempting. Again, if you're regressing, so you're around family members who all of a sudden you feel like you're a teenager again, like you don't have any power and you can't say anything, it's easy for some people to just like tell their kids, you know what, that's just how he is. That's how your Uncle Phil is, or whatever. You just got to let it roll off your back. And that's really not okay. It does affect children to be talked to like that. And depending on the tension level or the conflict level in your family, sometimes humor will work. Like, oh, grandpa, how many times we got to tell you no racial slurs at the dinner table, to kind of humorously be like, all right, dude, shut it down. We're not doing that. Or we don't talk like that around here anymore. Can we just move on to something else? Now, in some families, that's not going to work, and it might escalate instead. And once more, you get to decide how you're going to respond to that. We've asked you respectfully to not make those comments. If you continue to do that, though, I think we're probably we're going to have to go. Or, we'll come back later, we can play some games, but right now we're going to go out to eat, or we're going to go get a cup of coffee, take a walk, take a break. It's up to you what you need to do to take care of yourself and take care of your family. Controversial topics, we've talked about that. I would say if then is an important thing to remember about boundaries. If this happens, then I will do the following. I've touched on that a little bit, but an example of a boundary or a not boundary would be, okay, you don't tell someone, don't call me after 8 p.m. I've told you not to call me after 8 p.m. You can't control if someone's going to call you after a certain time, but you can turn your ringer off and tell people, I don't answer my phone after 8 p.m. Or, I love to hear from you, but I'm not going to answer my phone anymore after this time. So leave me a message and I'll get back to you in the morning. You can hold your own boundary instead of depending on other people to hold it for themselves, because it's about you, not them. That is most of what I had planned to talk about, but I'd love to have more casual conversation, or if anyone has questions, can we maybe chat a little bit?
Thanks, Katie. Lots of good things. I see people taking notes. I don't know that I've seen that before in a speaker. So maybe they are, you don't always see online. So we don't have any questions in chat yet. But I know we were talking a little bit before, like sometimes I've seen a lot of situations where there's maybe a newer reunion, or maybe not newer, but people who didn't grow up together and either have very different philosophies or sometimes very different traditions, maybe very different politics, but they're drawn to spend the time together. So I think a lot of those situations fit into the types of things that you already commented about, but I don't know if you've got any more to say on that.
We can blend traditions. If you have a particular cultural tradition you'd like to introduce to the family, maybe you can do that in a small way to start. People have a hard time with change, so they might not respond well to that, but it could be in some families because they don't know enough about these traditions yet. And in other families, it could be because they're really being exclusive, or maybe even xenophobic. So it's going to vary significantly. And that's when you come back to this point of how much can you deal with? How much are you willing to tolerate? And at what point does it veer from a difference in values to, emotional violence, or psychological violence, or feeling completely unaccepted or rejected. So it can range, again, from something really mild to really being psychologically unsafe. And I think especially for adopted people, the nature of the experience requires us to survive and get by, and it's fine, everything's fine. And we get really good at that, to where in some families we'll put up with some pretty emotionally and psychologically violent behavior because we got to fit in to survive. And so this process of learning to speak up and ask for what you need can be a huge shift for some people. I mean, I'm saying some things that make it sound pretty easy, but it's really hard for a lot of people, and practice really will help you get better at it. And it might be a small step towards some pretty big life changes.
Thanks. I don't know if everybody's quiet because they're processing, or
I want to know what people
has...
are taking notes about. What's popping out as useful? What are you taking notes about?
Hi, I'm really questioning where all of this deep-seated, I don't feel loved if I'm not with my family kind of a stuff. And that's not just an adoption thing, it's a worldly thing. And I just really question why we continue to do what feels so bad.
That's an excellent question for therapy.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I would ask my client. I would ask about, how does it benefit you and how does it hurt you? Because just like any unpleasant relationship, from unpleasant to straight up abusive, it's not all bad. We are with this person for a reason. You've had some good times with your family, or else you definitely wouldn't be there at all. Somebody makes you laugh. Somebody in your family makes you laugh, or you have good memories with. So what does keep us going back for more? And then what hurts about it, or is it hurting or is it damaging? How can we rate the type of damage that's going on? And often that leads to the question of, what if your needs were just as important as everybody else's? And there's typically a lot underneath that too. So I tend to tune into power and risk. So what do you risk? So taking the example you said, why do we have to go every year? Or why don't we always feel like we belong if we're not with them? Well, what would you risk if you didn't go? And I usually hear things like, well, honestly, I usually hear my mom would be wrecked. It's usually about people's mothers. Which I get, because I'm really big into Christmas, and my family was like, we're not doing Christmas this year. I'd get over it, right? But I would definitely be affected. Wreck my mom, or it's her favorite holiday. She goes all out, and I don't have the heart to tell her I'm not going to go. Okay, all right. But what do you risk? What do you risk? If you're saying it would hurt someone else, what's your risk if they get hurt? And typically it all ends up back at, I'm afraid they'll reject me. I'm afraid they won't want me to come back. I'm afraid they won't love me. If we go deep enough, at least for the people that I work with, it typically goes to some of those fears around rejection and abandonment. Now, I will say, I've worked with a number of adopted college students who struggle with families holding purse strings. So there's a much more concrete power dynamic for some people. Like, if I don't go home, they're going to get mad. And what if they decide not to pay for school? Or what if they decide not to give me my car back because they took it for repairs? Or I need to get my documentation and my mom still has it, and I'm afraid if I don't play the game, or with my dad, then I'm not going to get what I need from them. I hear that less often, but it's definitely real. But you make a good point. we're not required to subject ourselves to something constantly that hurts and wounds us. However, many people feel like, for a number of reasons, that they don't have any other option. Whether that's because I could lose them, or it would hurt them, or I need something from them in some way, or I owe them. I don't want to betray them. There's a lot of debt and gratitude and financial stuff kind of mixed up in there because of how our relationship started for the most part. I hear a lot of that as well.
Katy, I'm curious if you have clients who are birth family members, and, you know, compare and contrast. You've talked a lot about kind of adoptee issues, maybe at the holidays.
I have, when I've had first parents, it definitely comes up for them as well. Usually either in terms of what they've shared about their story, they've either not shared anything and we're not in a place where they're ready to start talking about it with their family yet, or everybody knows, they've known for a long time that I placed a child for adoption and whatnot. But for them, I find more we're dealing with issues of grief. And yeah, I'm glad you prompted me to say that, because that's an important point, that it's a time of year when everybody's talking about family, and it's on TV, and it's in the commercials, and it's in the movies, and our friends are posting pictures on social media of spending time with their family, and it can be really upsetting, or wishing they could be with people that they can't be with, or wondering if they're okay. The first parents that I see more often are in closed adoptions, or they're in open adoptions where contact has been cut off by the adopted family. So there's usually a lot of grief around the injustice of it, which is righteous anger. That, you know, I was supposed to be able to see my child at the holiday season, and now I can't. So it could be grief, anger, could be a wide range of emotions. Adoption's messy. We feel everything all the time, I think. So sadness, grief, loss, and also feeling alone, like maybe they can't necessarily talk about it to the people they'd like to talk to, or afraid they won't get it, or they don't want to burden folks with their feelings, which again comes back to, you know, what if this was legitimate grief, and what if your feelings were important? You'd be allowed to talk about this. But I think it's also important to pick the right people. If you talk to people you don't know as well about your feelings, there is some risk involved that they could wallop you with those uninformed opinions or statements that we unfortunately hear so often. But it can be very isolating. I think adoption in general tends to be an isolating experience. It's a very internal experience. And I think all folks affected by it typically have to be selective about who they talk to, because you just don't always know what people think about it until we start talking.
And then what's your perspective like from an adoptive parent angle? I don't know for sure if we have any adoptive parents who are currently parenting, but I would suppose that the holidays can be especially triggering for kids in your home as well.
I don't hear much about the adoptive parents I work with having issues around the holiday. They're not usually the ones that speak to me about having struggles at the holiday season. Not that they don't. They just may not be bringing that to me personally. When it does come up for them, I hear more about like, most of the adoptive parents I work with, because I usually do consults with them, they're usually in adoption situations where it was an international adoption, so they may not know the child's first family, or they may have adopted from Child Protective Services and they're not in a situation where they can currently communicate with biological family members because the kids are usually really young. And from the casework, the CPS casework perspective, they may not be at a phase during their involvement with CPS where communication is possible. They'll bring concerns about, you know, how do I support my child? But again, it's all about just talking about it. I think we spend a lot of time afraid to talk about things and maybe hesitant to say things out loud about our feelings because we're worried we're not going to say it right, or we're not going to say it in a way that someone else can understand. But you have to start somewhere. So just being able to say out loud, you know, sometimes I miss some of my family members at this time of year. I wonder if you miss your first family. Reaching out in that way, or just acknowledging it. Like, I wonder if you're feeling sad at all, or do you miss them? Did you all used to have anything special you would do together at the holiday season? Which could be totally loaded questions for some kids. Maybe not the best thing to talk about, but you're going to find out when you ask. And then to say, well, now I know that's something that's sensitive for you to talk about. It helps me to know that if they don't want to dwell on it. But I hear less from them about first interactions with first family because they're not usually in that kind of a situation.
Mm-hmm. But being aware of things that might be triggers for their kids.
Yes.
Or things that might be very internal for their kids, and giving them permission to think them and talk about them out loud if they want to.
What were their traditions? What kind of foods did they eat? They might not know, but you're caring by asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks. What other questions do people
Other
have?
questions in chat?
Or what pieces can you relate to?
Do you have any suggestions about, like, if you're in reunion, for example, and you're trying to navigate, like, you know, you're invited to like a get together, perhaps with the original family, but then, you know, you're trying to still navigate the relationship too. So you're not sure what's, you know, what to do. Yeah.
Are you, Barbara, are you talking about like dividing your time? How do you divide your time?
No, it's more like the dynamics like within it, because like you said, adoption is messy. So if you're still navigating the waters of getting to know, you know, people that you did not know before, do you have any like tips to kind of go along with that you don't want, like, you're still trying to move forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you're also trying to, like you said, with adoptees, trying to respect whatever they had going on. But they invited you, you know, they invited you in. So
I would say all of that. Say it out loud. Like, you know, I'm really excited to see you. I feel a little weird about it because I don't know you all very well. And it might be awkward. I don't know, but I hope that you'll be patient with me as we get to know each other, because this is super weird. Just to say it out loud and get it out there. I will say sometimes people, I'm all about like the radical feeling disclosure and the radical honesty. And sometimes people don't know what to do with it. I can appreciate that. But I find a lot of my clients have success with that. And it's kind of like throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what will stick, or kind of meta processing. Like, this feels really awkward. I've never been around this many people at one time. I'm happy to be here, but this is overwhelming. Just say it out loud and people know what's going on. And I think also it sometimes sends a signal that it's okay for them to open up to you about what's going on with them in that moment. And it's okay to say out loud, you know, okay, cool. I really want to come. I want to come to this event. I also want to go to this other thing. Cause you know what? It's a little like when you have a partner and you both have local family. I think that's worse than when you have family that's out of town, because you lose your whole day driving all across town to see different families. So, you know, I just want you to know it's nothing personal, but I'm just trying to balance my time today or this week while I'm in town. And I really want to get to see everybody, and I'm having a hard time with that. So please bear with me. I think the more you communicate, the more likely people are to understand what's going on than if you get stuck with the holding it all inside feeling, and then you under communicate because you're afraid of tripping up, And then people, they can't read our mind. So they're left wondering like, oh, I don't know, did I overstep? Was it too soon for me to invite her? Maybe there were too many people. I don't know. You can just say it out loud. And that's not going to work for everybody. Some of these things are going to vary by your personality and what works for you. Or you may find like an ambassador within the family, who's the person that you talk to the most, that tells you the most about the family, the kind of the story keeper. That might be the person you tell. Hey, if anybody says anything, everything's fine. I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed. I'm going to take a walk, but I'll be back. And let's do something when I get back. I think sometimes over communicating can be helpful. Is that kind of what you were asking?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I love that phrase you said, radical feeling and radical honesty.
Just say it.
I love that. But you know why? Because I think that's true. I think that we've been, our culture is like to be nice all the time, like that we have to be nice, and anything that is not feeling or appearing to be nice, then somehow we're being mean and hurtful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, don't be rude, right? You can be radically honest and use good manners. But I think they kind of go to, that's a loaded phrase, good manners, but they can go together because it's part of social norms. And it's how you keep the peace when you're trying to get along with people you don't know very well. And so a wise therapist I used to know like 20 years ago once told me, when you're really in, and this was about my first family, if you're around a group of people that you don't understand, or they're driving you crazy, or you don't really know them well enough to understand what's going on, and you're really trying to like get your footing in this new environment, pretend they are an important visiting dignitary from another land, and you are with the United Nations, and you are here to learn about their culture. And you amp up yes, interesting, tell me more, because you really are there to understand. You want to understand, you want to learn, you want to practice excellent diplomacy skills, because you want to be honest without being offensive. And so sometimes the best way to do that is to just say it out loud. I really want to ask you some questions. I hope I'm not overstepping, but would you mind telling me whatever the thing is you want to know, or what are the traditions here? I think thinking of it as being diplomatic can help a lot. You're there to learn and to share about your own culture. That does assume, as I mentioned earlier, that you're both there in good faith, that you don't have like a really specific agenda to get an opinion across or something. And you may find out things you don't like, or you may find out frightening things, but that is when you use your boundary setting. If you don't mind, I'm just going to step away for a moment. I need to make a call. Or if you're there with a friend or a family member, have a signal. Even if you're visiting your family of origin or whoever, hey, if I say, I've got a crisis client at 7, I'm really going to have to cut out. I need you to back me up. It's okay to have a signal. Just like on a bad date, you'd have your friend call like an hour in to check on you and see if you need to escape. You can do that with your family too. It's okay, but build yourself in an escape hatch.
You see why we're taking so many notes? I mean, this is great stuff.
One of the things that came to mind for me, Katy, while you were talking was the first or second Christmas, or even more with birth family. You have to also keep in mind, I think you're seeing that family at a stressful moment, like all the stuff that you were saying about going home for the holidays and getting back into old patterns and people pressing your buttons. That family's going, regardless of you even being there, that family's going through that. They've got their adult kids coming home, and you're dealing with all the family dynamics and all the stuff that you don't know yet about this family and how they
and you see a little squabble over in the corner, and you're like, oh, something's going on with them. I don't know about that. Yeah, I guess I'll find out about that later. Yeah.
And so it's an interesting way to get immersed.
And one more serious comment while I'm thinking about it. If you are taking anything prescribed by your doctor, like antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, anything like that, make sure it's filled. You're not running out on Christmas Day when you want to throttle everybody. Use them as prescribed. Take them when you're supposed to take them. This is not the time to forget for 3 days to take your Lexapro. So make sure that you're on your schedule and taking care of yourself as you need to. Drink a lot of water. That helps with trauma, helps with memory and stress. And I can't overemphasize the importance of taking breaks. If you need to take a nap, take a nap. Make sure you're feeding yourself. I have a lot of clients, especially adoptees, that are struggling with some variation of disordered eating, and they go home and their family's serving meals on a schedule. And it's like the kitchen's closed when the kitchen's closed. Bring snacks in your suitcase if you have to. Take yourself to the grocery store, order by Instacart, get what you need so that you're not hangry all the time when you're dealing with people treating you like you're 14 again. Take care of you. That's the number one thing.
Sarah, I'm sorry. It's like I see some head shaking.
It makes me so sad that this is even a subject, and yet it's become, I mean, it's been part of the healing process for me to really look over the years at my adopted family, but it's, I don't know, it's like I now look at my kids and go, so no matter what I did, it still is there. And it's a societal thing, and it makes me really sad that we don't find comfort anywhere, do we? With either side. Or, I mean, it just, I find it very kind of disturbing.
Mm-hmm. It's for
gray, isn't it? Yeah, isn't it like a gray area, Katy?
It is. I mean,
well,
those are
the folks that I'd say, why don't you go on vacation? You know, take a vacation or stay home, watch cheesy movies and eat whatever you want. Like, you can make your own meal. It doesn't have to be the same thing your family eats every year for the past 50 years. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you've grown up in a household with a lot of rules, or, you know, everybody does what dad wants to do because if you don't, you get in trouble. Some people have never considered that there's another way, that there could be another way, and that you would be allowed to engage in it. There was just too much at stake. And like I said, sometimes small changes lead to really big changes. So, you know, I'm talking about simple things like play games, but you're making the important point that this could be part of a much bigger issue for some folks. Are there any other chat comments or questions or anything? Yes, create your own traditions. Yeah. I can give a tiny, like, boring example. I have had a fake tree because I was on my own for so long. I didn't want to mess with getting a real tree, but I had a green tree, like a fake green Christmas tree. And I, you know, now that I'm newly married, I'm in a different kind of family structure. I have a step kid. I didn't have biological children before now. They pulled out their own tree and it's silver in the living room. And I was sitting out there earlier thinking, this is little and maybe a little dumb, but like it never would have occurred to me that ever in my lifetime I'd have a silver tree. And like how much, for people that celebrate Christmas or they use Christmas trees, how everybody has very specific, sometimes very rigid opinions about what it's supposed to be like or what things are supposed to look like. And I just was sort of laughing inside, like, it's interesting that I think the silver tree is such a big deal. It's just a thing we get out once a year for 3 weeks and put stuff on. Does it really matter? Not really, but because of our experiences and traditions, we sometimes develop these rigid ideas about how things are supposed to be done. And even with a small thing like that tree, it can kind of blow your mind a little bit to do things in a different way. So, you know, a tree is nothing compared to, you know, maybe my family's really just too mean for it to be worth it for me to go home this year. I'm not going to do it. That's a big jump. But if changing the kind of tree you have makes your brain shake a little, thinking about not going home for the holidays might be really hard.
We have time for maybe one last question, or we can wrap up if everybody's. Oh, I saw something come in chat. Let me see. So thank you.
That is an obvious and excellent question that I did not think about bringing resources with me. My apologies. I would say an oldie but a classic is probably Codependent No More by Melody Beatty. That's a bit more basic one to start with. It's mostly about codependency, but I mean, you can struggle with boundaries and not be codependent. So it's still going to have good information in there. Because I'm on the spot, I'm having a bit of a brain fart. But if Betsy, do you have a way to communicate resources?
Yeah, so we actually we send out a follow-up after every Monday evening. And so Katy, if you want to give it a little bit of thought when you're not on the spot, then you could send me something the next day or two.
I can do that.
Glad to get that.
Rosscar is really pushing me today, aren't you? Podcast. Okay, I'm one of these people that actually doesn't listen to podcasts a whole lot because I don't know where people find the time. I would love to do that. I know Adoptees On is always a good resource. There was another one mentioned at the AKA conference that I can send to Betsy. Let me look into that, and I'll include that when I email her as well. You're welcome.
Good. As we wrap up, I'm going to put this link in the chat. We do make a survey. Why is this not working? Available to everybody so that you can give us your thoughts and let us know how you enjoyed this evening or anything you'd like to tell us, any upcoming topics that you might be interested in hearing. So please take a minute to take that survey. That'll be in the follow-up email that you'll get in the next couple days as well. And thank you everybody for joining us this evening. It was really nice to have you. And Katy, thank you so much for volunteering your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having
me. Such a timely topic, and I hope this is helpful for everybody as you move into the next few weeks, which can be relaxing and magical and special and also intense. And
good luck. You can do
it. So as many of you know, Adoption Network Cleveland is a nonprofit organization. We serve individuals and families impacted by adoption, kinship, and foster care through support, education, and advocacy. We're a membership organization. We invite you to join us, and you can take a look at our website, which is adoptionnetwork.org. I've already put the link in for the upcoming program, so we hope to see you next week with Michelle Kriegman. And thank you again for being here tonight. So Katy, if you want to stay on for a sec. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.